Now welcome Dr. Derek Haas, Jordan Robison, Dr. Joe Elabd, Daniel Womack, and Reed Clay.
They weren't lying about these lights. All right, we're coming towards the end. I'd like to invite you to or welcome you to the panel on how Texas became an overnight nuclear sensation. We have an amazing panel here. Our panel are actually representing the officers of the Board of Directors of the Texas Nuclear Alliance. So I guess y'all were not present when we assigned those roles? No, I'm just kidding. They volunteered. So I guess we'll just dive right in. And we'll talk about how some people are saying Texas looks like this overnight nuclear success. Where did Texas come from on this? We know Governor Abbott, who just spoke, kicked us off in the Advanced Nuclear Reactor Working Group in 2023. We've all been involved in projects since then and before then. And so I'd like to ask each of you what actually changed to create this moment that we're in right now. Let's start with Reed.
Yeah. I think I wrote the name of the panel, so it's my fault. But I think it's overnight. Maybe is not entirely accurate. By the way, we put this at the end because we knew this would be a huge draw and the room would be filled. So good planning on our part. No, I mean, so it isn't overnight, right? I mean, I think for a couple different reasons, the seeds for what we're seeing both in Texas and and outside of Texas have been germinating for quite some time. I think you heard the governor talk about, generally speaking, the regulatory environment, the low tax environment, and the Texas miracle that is driving demand. I mean, businesses are flocking here. That has created a huge demand signal for more energy, and a lot of that is being driven by AI, who also wants to be here and also has carbon goals, along with, not just AI, but there are other companies, Dow being one of them, that has carbon goals they need to meet. And so I think fundamentally the biggest thing that has laid the groundwork for this seemingly overnight interest in nuclear is the Texas miracle that's really been going for 20 or 25 years. And on the flip side of that, I think we've had a deregulated energy-only market, which earlier y'all heard me say I love. And but one of the things about that market and the deregulated aspect of it is that the subsidies for wind and solar, particularly wind for rough numbers, 2010 to 2020, net new generation was wind. 2020 to now, net new generation is solar and batteries. I mean, that's, again, rough estimates. And that kind of distortion in the marketplace has, along with the rapid growth and in demand, has really, created seemingly overnight, an understanding that nuclear is an answer that's been here all along and one that we need to look back at. So yeah, I mean, I think it's been a long time coming.
I agree with Reed, obviously, but I think that what happened is there was a realization that there was a handful of projects here and all moving forward at some scale and being successful in that regard. And I think, it started with the governor saying, hey, we need to capitalize on this. And so when he laid that mark down, I think the legislature, after the work group, the PUC work group, the legislature picked that up and took it and passed House Bill 14. I mean, Reed's right, this is still a great place to do business when, Governor Bush and Governor Perry kind of started the Texas miracle and everyone started moving here. That's only continued to grow. We live in a state with great natural resources, great access to workforce, all of those things you need when you're building, a small modular reactor. or operating an industrial plant here in the state. So it really was the initial success of those handful of projects that I think drove the governor and the legislature to realize, hey, we've got something here. Let's make this state the place where these investments should go.
Do you have anything?
I don't know if I can add much of that. I mean, I really would also say this specific alliance had a big part to do with this, and want to thank Reed for his leadership. I think it really galvanized our whole community, brought us together. This is the second meeting, twice, I think more than twice the size of last meeting, and so I think that was had a big proponent of getting a lot of eyes on the state of Texas, obviously the governor as well, and HB 14, and then also, different, I do think, and I'll be a little bit biased because I'm coming from the academic setting, but I think campus is opening up the idea of them being a site. So, and probably even with Abilene Christian and Natura, and even well beyond this sort of movement, I think Natura was a great company who started laying a groundwork by doing a lot of research and development at an early phase with the universities across Texas, Abilene Christian, University of Texas, Austin, Texas A&M University, which then led to your siting at Abilene, and then now you're siting at the A&M System Rellis campus. So I think there had been a lot of groundwork, but I think this association, I definitely think the governor, and we heard from him earlier, and the passage of HB 14 really started to catalyze everything together. But would definitely say really grateful to be on this stage, kind of humbled with Reed, his leadership. I think one of the big announcements that came out first was the X-Energy Dow announcement. So, and then also Natura's work with all the universities and siting at Abilene.
Yeah, I think that's, if you look back to 2023, what it really did is it shone a light on what was already happening in the state, right? So we've got some incredible universities with the University of Texas, Texas A&M, Abilene Christian, all these groups we've been working with for a long time now. I mean, we filed a construction permit in 2022 and had a facility complete in 2023. So we were already moving very fast down this path. But I think that the 2023 working group really brought to light a lot of what was taking place in the state. And then 2025 with the House Bill 14 and everything else that came out of that in the budget just really showed Texas's commitment to, no, we're going to be leaders. It's really exciting to be here.
So let me add one more thing here, and I think it's kind of was mentioned here by all three, and they each represent a different project, and I think to call Texas an overnight nuclear sensation is to minimize both the courage and ingenuity that the entities on this stage had, because Dow's project didn't start last year. I mean, they've been thinking about what to do at Seadrift with their assets that are their natural gas assets that are going to retire for many years. And the idea of looking at nuclear to replace that 3 or 4 years ago or 5 years ago, whenever they started that process, was a courageous decision at that time. I mean, I think we take that for granted a little bit. Jordan talked about Natura's process and the consortium that they built with ACU and University of Texas and Texas A&M. And, you don't get a license to construct a demonstration reactor overnight. You don't even get to the point of filing the application with the NRC overnight. So, I mean, there's a lot of courageous work that went on before nuclear was cool again by both of them. And then, talk about courage and vision. Texas A&M University System, the Rellis campus, the idea that you're just going to create a proving ground for small modular reactors is, that's not a decision you make overnight. And to say it's an overnight sensation is to minimize, in each individual case, the immense amount of thought and courage, frankly, that went into, making the decisions that they made to, make these projects real.
I certainly don't think the last 5 years or so for all of us has felt like overnight. It's been a long slog. So, but it's great to see the amount of energy that we have now behind us. I mean, this really is making things easier to work through these projects. So given that, how has the way that Texas works and the nuclear approach in Texas made it so that y'all want to stay and develop these projects in Texas as opposed to elsewhere? Because I'm sure there's interest in recreating the kind of projects you're doing here elsewhere.
I mean, Texas is the energy capital of the world. I think we look at things differently here. These are not science experiments. We look at them as energy projects, right, that we're pushing across the finish line. There's so many resources here in the state, so much experience in the energy industry to lean into, right? We've been working with Zachary Group, a 101-year-old company, for 3-4 years now, leveraging that experience, right? We're starting to work with NOV, 160-plus years old, right? When you look at groups like that, NOV in particular, that in 2010 started doing these huge offshore drilling rigs that came out, and they were $1 billion a piece when they first came out. 4 years later, they were down to $400 million. So big oil and gas companies that know how to build these products that have gone from first of a kind, very expensive products, to nth of a kind, 60% reduction in that price. The ability to lean into that here in the state of Texas just primes us to be able to really expand this industry. So Doug Robison, our founder, he'll say, why does Texas have an oil and gas industry? Because we've got the rock, the oil and gas is here, right? The advanced reactor industry, it can be anywhere and then exported out around the country, around the globe. Texas is primed just because of our experience in the energy industry and the capabilities we have here to be that group that is exporting that technology. So the more we can leverage those existing capabilities here in the state, that's what really makes Texas special in the ability to deploy these technologies moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably give thanks again to the governor. I mean, we for us, we're a state entity. And so having the leader of the state be pro-business, and also lean in on nuclear, that made it really easy for us, and particularly with our leadership, to say, hey, we're going to do something that aligns with the CEO of the state of Texas. And so that really, I think, helped propel us. It's hard to do this in other states. I think it's just really hard. And it's not just from the whether you're a pro-business or not a super pro-business state and you have low regulations and all that. I think a lot of it has to do with leadership and aligning with leadership. And as a state entity, the governor's made it very easy for us to do things on state land. And I would definitely echo that. So.
Yeah, I mean, Dow has an extensive process that we go through when we look at citing a new project or expanding a project, much like, all the other large companies in the room. Reed alluded to this, but in 2019, we went through our top 25 assets globally and said, how do we run these energy assets that are powering, the assets that are sitting at the sites? How do we replace those assets? How do we make them run cleaner? And then looked at technologies that, that we're going to be ready to deploy in the next, 10 years or so. And that's how we ended up going down the SMR discussion route, and we got hooked up with X-Energy through old internal DOE contacts. But there's a process that all these companies go through, and when you find a technology that works in the setting, that you have, where you're trying to replace, cogen assets, then you start looking, okay, well, where are the states or the countries that you want to operate in? Obviously, Dow has a large footprint here in Texas, along the Gulf Coast, over to even through Louisiana, and so it was a natural fit. The Seadrift community has been amazing. The partnership with X-Energy has been amazing, and with DOE, and now with this nuclear office, we look to partner with them as well, moving forward.
Yeah, I think I may answer this question out of order earlier, but no, I think the focus on being business friendly is what drives a lot of it. I do think that, I happened to be in the meeting when Dow sort of unveiled their big plans at Seadrift to the governor, and I remember after the entire presentation, the first question was, well, what can you do to build more? And I think And that to me is a pretty critical moment in, where we sit today, because that ultimately led, in my mind, to, the message that sent is like, particularly in the nuclear industry at that time, it's kind of like, you wonder what he's going to say, I mean, not everyone loved nuclear forever. So, but that sort of set off a, chain reaction, I'll use that pun. The governor, not long after that, I mean, I think it was maybe 5 months later, he announced the Advanced Nuclear Working Group, which, everybody on this stage participated in. And, that vision and that foresight, and really, I think and the imprimatur that the leader of the state is not only okay with your nuclear project, but actually wants to find a way to help it and then, frankly, duplicate it and triplicate it. And I don't know what comes after that, but that sends a message to people that, let's build. And I think that obviously we know what happened. I mean, the Advanced Nuclear Working Group, and it truly is a kind of chain of events that have led us to where we are. That led to the recommendation for what essentially turned into House Bill 14 and the direct investment by the legislature. And so all those early seeds about Texas being open for business are definitely a key ingredient to the success that I think it may be an ingredient that most states will struggle to duplicate. We get a lot of outreach from other states who kind of want to know the playbook, so to speak. And there are a couple things that are just inherent to Texas. Well, they're not inherent, but they're in our DNA in a way that they're not in other states, that it's going to be hard to duplicate. And but we shouldn't, even though we have that in our DNA and it is a big part of this, we shouldn't discount the importance, the signal that is sent by the CEO of the state saying, we want to help your project, but then we actually want to figure out from the entire industry around the table how we do more of it, because we want to be the leader in it, because we know that Texas needs the energy, and we also see an opportunity from an economic development standpoint that if this nuclear renaissance sticks this time, the expansion of the industry is going to be enormous, and we want to own the majority of that in the state of Texas. So that imprimatur is extremely important.
So let's change gears a bit and talk about how this whole thing came together as far as the Texas Nuclear Alliance. So we'll definitely start with Reed here. How did this come together? What have you learned? What did you not know when you started this all up?
Well, I didn't know much of anything when I started, but no, I mean, I don't have a nuclear background, right? So, I mean, obviously I worked for the governor for many years. One of the issues I worked on was nuclear waste, and that was, I later worked on that issue when I left the governor's office in a different capacity. And there was just a lot of, I'll call it funny politics around that site and waste in general. And I think at first for me, it was a little bit of like a professional novelty in the sense that it was just kind of something I had to deal with and work around. And then Uri happened. And, I think that required all of us to take a good look under the hood, so to speak. And, I think what stuck with me is that the politics that I'd been experiencing in relation to the waste were the same politics that had led for, Comanche Peak 3 and 4, South Texas Project 3 and 4 not to be followed through. And I think, it started there, right? I mean, honestly, I didn't know a lot about the nuclear industry when I started. What I did know is that it had no or bad advocacy, because the voices, at least in this state, were only on one side of the ledger. And frankly, they were pulling levers, in my mind, that were sort of like remarkably and oddly effective in a state like Texas. And, essentially no one was doing this. No one was speaking for the industry. And, Lauren, who's sitting right here, calls it my midlife crisis, but I just thought that the industry needed somebody like this. I thought that nuclear was the answer, and it started with an idea, and a lot of days I started to wonder if I was the crazy guy that believed so fervently in something that they could no longer see reality. And then John Sharp called me. And I'm like, oh, there's two crazy persons sitting together. No. And then it cascaded from there. And I think in some ways, the one thing that I knew in the beginning is the one thing that I still know is true, which is this industry, like all others, I mean, it's not unique to nuclear, is stronger when it speaks with one voice. And there's one thing about the Texas Capitol that I assume is true about every other Capitol, and that the lesson you learned in kindergarten from your parents, that there's strength in numbers, is a really big deal. And I think that's the fundamental driving force of what we're trying to do. And I think, you can ask the other folks up here, I think there's also a realization amongst the members. A&M was first. Natura wasn't far behind. Dow took a while, but no, I'm just kidding. But I think they realize that if we're going to do this in a big way, we need to speak together. We need to speak in one voice. We're going to have differing ideas. We're going to have diverging interests occasionally, but fundamentally, the rising tide will lift all of our boats. And I think, that buy-in has led to, 60-plus members at this point. That is, I think, obviously having an effect with policymakers and appropriators.
I'll just add, I remember the first conversation I had with Reed about the alliance.
He thought I was the crazy guy.
I wouldn't say, I don't think you were crazy, but I do remember saying, are you sure you want to do that? I've worked for trade associations. I work with a number of trade associations now, obviously, both here and in DC. It's really a thankless job, right? You got a lot of members that all want, pulling you a different way. But I will say this, House Bill 14 would have been a hell of a lot harder if we didn't have the alliance, leading us, and we all still had opinions, but Reed and Lauren, again, Lauren's sitting down here, and Lauren does a lot of work behind the scenes and probably doesn't get enough credit, and so please be sure and thank Lauren for everything she does. But it was the right time to do it. If he would have waited, it would have been more challenging.
Yeah, I certainly got the email from Reed when Texas A&M signed up and said, where are you guys? You really going to let A&M go first? So related to that, I got some questions. We have some students working here to help us out, so we appreciate all their help. And some of the students were asking me about some of the things we've done. And frankly, the question was, why are you doing this work for TNA for free? Why aren't y'all, doing this in a different way? And I explained that while UT has a lot of gravitas behind what we say, when we get industry involved as well, the things that we're trying to advocate for bring even more momentum behind that. And so I guess any other thoughts on that?
I'll say one thing there and then I'll be quiet, but I think one of the things I didn't know that I think has been a real key to the industry's success here is the buy-in from multiple aspects of the industry. Mm-hmm. It's the university systems, it's the developers, it's the off-takers, and it really goes even beyond that. We have, obviously we have the biggest nuclear operators in the country in Vistra and Constellation. And then we have a whole host of, other industry players, and having off-takers, traditional utilities, university systems, and, the developers of the SMRs is an incredible 360 view of what's going on in the industry. And I think, that is a difficulty in a trade association because there really are divergent interests, particularly in the electricity market. And I saw Walt Baum here a minute ago, but things can diverge pretty quickly in that space amongst off-takers and generators and even developers. So, but that when what we're trying to do is just educate about nuclear and teach about nuclear and help people understand the opportunity if they invest in this industry right now has been extremely important. I mean, without a doubt, you know, we have to have that off-taker perspective, right? And same with the universities. We got to have that expertise. And of course, we have to have the developers who are working extremely hard on, you know, bringing this technology, which is going to change the way our state works.
What about the last 2 years has proved harder than you expected? And I'll open this up to anything you're working on. So, Jordan, let's start with you.
I think the kind of a change in, I think you see in the general, there's good bipartisan support for nuclear. The education process of kind of separating out what old existing nuclear looks like and some of the benefits of the new technology. That's been a little bit of a challenge, but it's been a very good conversation, right? I think that's one of the benefits of what we've been doing in Abilene is we've not had a single dissenting voice about what we're doing, and we're building a nuclear reactor across the street from a girls and boys dormitory, right? But a big part of that is just open communication with the community, right? Having a facility that's open to them, come in, learn about what we're doing, learn about why we're doing it, learn about how we're doing it, learn about why it's different than maybe what you're afraid of on the nuclear side, things of that nature. And so just kind of the education process there, I think, has been a little bit challenging, but also very good at the same time.
Joe?
Yeah, I would say even more recently, so we had news this week about Last Energy siting in Bryan, Texas at our Rellis campus under that DOE fast track. So I think for us, that has made us move a lot faster than we've ever moved. But I've been really happy with how we've responded. I think we've done a really great job on our side. But you're learning something new every day on the NRC side, on the DOE side, with what our capabilities are to host that. So, and I would even take a step back. You know, when we looked at this years ago, we saw where these companies were gravitating to build their first model reactors and test them. It was Idaho National Laboratory, it was Oak Ridge National Laboratory. Well, why did they go there? These are these major DOE laboratories that have decades of experience in nuclear engineering, and they have facilities. And then here we are as Texas, we're the ones who need this the most. We're the ones that's probably the most friendliest for this. So where are they going to go? And then I thought about it. Well, we've got 2 universities in this state that always rank in the top 10 in DOE funding. I would argue that we have the 2 top energy universities in the country. And so how do we leverage that? And I think we thought about, you know, we have a campus in Bryan, Texas. That's 3,200 acres. We have really put a lot of capital into that to do applied research in many different areas. And we started thinking about, well, how can we leverage our expertise in energy? We have a number of outstanding nuclear engineering faculty here that are represented from Texas A&M University. How do we leverage their subject matter expertise? How do we leverage the fact that we have 80,000 students, 25,000 engineering students, and then also our whole community and our ecosystem, you know, has been incredible in that process. So that was something else that I learned too that's been great. We have the Mayor Brian here. We have our leader of our economic development corporation, Salman Khan here. We have come together as a community. We've responded to this. That's been probably the most inspiring thing that I've seen. It's not just, you know, when a company comes into that space, particularly in nuclear, you've got to create a whole environment for them. It's got to be friendly. The citizens have to be on board. The city council, the county councils, the judge got to be on board. Everybody has to be on board. And I really have been really inspired by how everybody in our community has come together and created an ecosystem, not just a campus where it's a plug-and-play developed site, but also the entire community has come around that. So for me, those are a lot of things I learned in the last couple of years, but I think I've been really, really encouraged by what I've seen.
Great.
I'll say 2 things. One for our project and then one on the legislation. For the project, we filed our CPA earlier this year, construction permit application, for those of you who don't know that acronym yet. And it takes a lot. If you have a project that you're trying to move forward, the amount of work that your team is putting in to get to that point. And then less than 60 days later, we got the schedule and resource letter from the NRC, which, was more progress. So just getting to that point is a lot of work for the team. And that was, I think, a big accomplishment for our project. On the legislative piece, it's hard to pass a bill, especially a really big bill like House Bill 14 was. Reed and I have been in fights together in the Capitol where you pass a bill, the first go around, and it is incredibly difficult. You have to get members' attention. They got a lot of things going on. We were dealing with, a legislature that had a huge budget surplus. So they're fighting over how to spend the money. And then we go ask for $2 billion, and they're like, who are you guys, So that is I think that's a big accomplishment. It's hard to do on the first shot out of the gate. So, but those two things, from my perspective, from a project and then from a TNA perspective, are great accomplishments.
Yeah, maybe I'll just tack onto that, Daniel, because I think what I have found to be the hardest is, and you heard a little bit from Chairman Darby and Chairman Harris today, it's something that's so obvious to me that the state of Texas ought to be investing in for a multitude of reasons. But there's some skepticism inside the building about the realness of it and the return on investment, like we talked about earlier this morning. And that the most difficult task that we have had, and a lot of this came in the context of passing House Bill 14, was dealing with that skepticism and trying to help. The industry's been dormant for so long. We've had so few projects, and the only recent project was Vogel, which I think one of our panelists earlier called a debacle. That might be right. And getting over that hump has been very difficult, and we're not there yet. The reality is that we wanted $2 billion. I think this isn't the only reason that we didn't get $2 billion, but part of the reason that we got $350 million instead was they want to see if this is real, they want to see if it's work, and they want to see what the return on the investment is. And so that has been the most difficult part. And I will tell you, the only reason we got anywhere near convincing enough people that this is real and that there is a return on investment is because there were so many industry participants that were working on real projects that we could point to. They would come to the Capitol. All three of these entities were in the Capitol talking about their projects, and not just those three, many others. So, yeah.
So given that, Representative Darby kind of laid down the gauntlet earlier. He said, we need to have some successes. So I'll ask the three of you here to my left, how are your projects going to help check that box that we're going to make some progress on these? Daniel?
Well, I would agree with them. We have to show progress. Otherwise, when we go to the legislature in 2027, they're just going to look at us, blankly. We hope to have a seat beat. We're going to continue to move towards the CPA, hopefully next year or early in 2027. I think there are other things that go on during that process, aside from the work at the NRC, that we can point to as the project continue to move forward. I think we all, have those in our projects. And so part of it's education, right? You're trying to educate them on what's going on here from a, advanced nuclear perspective, but your education, keeping them up to speed on what's going on with your project as well. And so, we'll do that. I know the Alliance will do that collectively for everybody, but we have to show them that we're continuing to move forward. Otherwise, when we go and ask them for money or changes to some other sort of policy, they're going to tell us to, exit the building, so.
Yeah, I think we got a lot of help from the feds. This summer, the executive orders from the president for DOE fast tracks, obviously 11 projects got selected for that. And I think what was helpful, even though a lot of people think it's a little crazy, but what is helpful is there's an actual date. It's one thing to say, okay, we're going to give you some authorization to do a fast track, do it fast. It's another thing to say, oh, July 4th of next year, less than a year away, we want you to show criticality, right? And so that has gotten 11 projects moving. One of those projects, obviously, we're fortunate we made an announcement this week, is going to be on the Rellis campus. And so I think for us, hopefully we'll be able to really show that progress in the state of Texas. And I'm really excited about that. I think we needed that little bit of that jump start because I was a little concerned. Very happy the bill got passed. Very happy there's a lot of money there. I know this community and I know the type of capital that's required. I think a lot of people want a lot more capital in this, but I do feel like between these two sessions, we had to show something, and I really do think the DOE Fast Track actually helped Texas. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how this goes. Even if none of them make it by July 4th, at least having that date there really accelerates everything for us, and I think you will show a lot of progress. I mean, in other states as well, but hopefully in the state of Texas, we can show that to the legislators as we go for the next session.
Yeah, echoing what Chairman Darby was saying earlier, we have to perform, right? It's unfortunate. There's a lot of, just in the advanced nuclear space in general, there's a lot of promotion. There's lots of talking about what we can do, talking about what we'd like to do. We've got to perform. We have to deliver on what we said we're going to do. If we don't deliver on what we said we're going to do, then the state's going to look at it and say, why are we putting this money out there? Which of these companies can we trust to actually follow through on what they said they're going to do? And so over the next couple of years, I mean, we're a part of that DOE pilot program. We were one of those projects selected. Getting the DOE support on your side, they move very fast. So within 2 weeks of getting selected for the pilot program, we had a commitment of fuel from the DOE as well. So it's a nice thing to have. We will be submitting our operating license application by the end of this year. We're submitting 2 new permit applications for commercial reactors by the end of this year, targeting at least 1 build here in the state of Texas. And then we're going to be actively moving forward. Purchase orders are going to be going out by the end of this year, if not the very beginning of next year, to actually start building a reactor, right? So we got to follow through on those things. Start showing progress, not on PowerPoint slides, but on actual reactor builds. We got an incredible opportunity to do that here in the state, both in Abilene, down at the Rellis campus, down at Seadrift. We've got several opportunities here in the state to really push forward and deliver on what we said we're going to do, and show leadership here in the state that, okay, we can back these projects. We can continue to push money into these projects and advance them forward for the state of Texas because people are following through on what they said they're going to do.
Well, that's exciting. I've got to take a moment here as we're talking about building things. One consistent theme all day long has been we're eventually going to have to turn towards this workforce development. And so I'd like to give a plug. Danny Ziggin out here organized a workshop about a month and a half ago. And she got over 50 participants from TNA members, other members of the industry to get together. So we published that report live on our website earlier this week. It is intended to just be the start of the conversation. It's not intended in any way to be, this is the final word on workforce development, but I encourage everybody that's thinking about workforce to go look at that, give us your thoughts. Let's start talking about that, and we can roll that into how we're gonna make sure that the personnel are there to help build these things as they're coming down the pipe. All right, we are coming to the close of this one, so we're just gonna end on a lightning round. For each of you, when we're back here in 2 years, what does success look like? Reed?
Yeah, I think deliver on our promises. We've been given the tools. I think if we do that, there's a great message to tell the legislature that what we told you 2 years ago, or 6 months ago now, but 2 years from now, was real, and here's what it's done for the state. And I think an important part of the message that the Alliance needs to convey is that this really is a competition with other states. And Radiant just chose Tennessee over Wyoming, and the political policy framework was the driving factor for the decision not to go to Wyoming and go to Tennessee. And so I think delivering on some of these projects and educating and keeping them informed on that, and then helping them understand that there's a huge opportunity cost if they don't follow through on what they've started.
Reed's right on the competition piece. I mean, Louisiana is about to go through, a similar exercise, maybe not at this scale from like the work group perspective, but, and then of course all the other states that have done something. But success, I think if we're sitting here in 2027 after a legislative session, I think, more money to the office, meaning, they will have gone through 1 or 2 successful rounds of getting money out the door. And I think, we all have to be a part of that, right? I mean, not only going and demonstrating that our projects are moving forward, but, accessing the money, making sure that office is successful so that we can all go back and say, we've done this, the projects have moved forward, keep putting money into this office so more projects can come behind us.
I think we've got to flip the switch on SMRs in Texas. I think there's got to be some SMRs that are operating in 2 years. I don't think we have to have a lot of wattage. Hopefully 5 years after that, we have a lot of wattage for the grid. But I think in the next 2 years, we have to turn on some SMRs.
Yes, so 2027, we've got an operating demonstration reactor in Abilene, hopefully the nation's first Generation 4 advanced reactor to actually go critical. And I would say shovels in the ground, construction started on 2 additional projects in the state of Texas. One down at Texas A&M at the Rellis campus, and one out in the Permian Basin working on produced water and trying to solve that problem out there, providing large quantities of energy and heat to turn around that produced water and try to answer some of the state's water needs. And so I would say that's what success looks like for us 2 years from now.
Well, that's great. It basically outlines how when folks talk about how nuclear can be slow and we need to start delivering on our promises, the next couple of years are going to be really interesting. And once we show success on these first reactors, money's going to start flowing in, and then all of a sudden, deploying many, many more reactors gets far easier after that first one's turned on. So thank you all for your time here on the panel and answers, and look forward to our next panel, our next discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek.
Thank you.